Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of After Further Review. I'm Jay Smith, and we're doing a little bit of a different show this week. Ole Miss is on spring break, so we're doing a remote broadcast. But hey, the show must go on. So lots to talk about this week related to college football, and let's just go ahead and jump right into it. Today's show is going to really focus on whether or not LSU can repeat as national champions. And, some of you are obviously immediately going to jump to the fact that, look, Joe Burrow is gone. LSU rather lost both their offensive and defensive coordinators. There's so much to replace, and yes, they do have a lot of key playmakers coming back, but their O-line is getting decimated, and a lot of guys leaving. Obviously, Burrow is gone, and the coordinators for both offense and defense. So, when I look at LSU's chances to repeat as national champions, I really have to look at the schedule. And obviously, now that LSU has won a national championship, and now that they went 15-0. Right now, they're the second team in modern college football history to do that, behind Clemson, who did it last year. And look, both Tigers now know this better than anyone. There's going to be a target on their back, right? I mean, when Clemson went 15-0 last year, and even in the years prior when they were competing for national titles, they had a target on their back by every team they played, right? Everyone wants a shot at the champion, especially the defending champion, and it's going to be difficult for LSU. There's a lot of coaches that, I mean, you think about Nick Saban at Alabama. I mean, he was sitting there on the sideline of that national championship game, and I'm sure Nick Saban is thinking, about all the things he needs to do to get back next year into the college football playoff, because we definitely saw, I think, an abnormality of Alabama not making it into the playoff. But even look at Gus Malzahn at Auburn, right? Auburn had as good a chance as anyone last year to take down LSU, and they just weren't able to do it. I think, you look at the games, right, that LSU was able to win, especially against those top teams, right? They played Clemson, Georgia, Florida, Oklahoma, Alabama, 5-0 in those games, and all of those teams finished in the top 8 of the final poll. So that's extremely difficult to do. They were able to accomplish it, but it's hard to imagine, with all the pieces that they've lost going into this coming season, that they're going to be able to replicate that. But let's go ahead and dive into their schedule, go into each game specifically, and talk about what chances they might have. And to start off, I mean, they've got just a tune-up game, right? September 5th, UT San Antonio. Shouldn't be any trouble there. Not thinking that that's going to be a challenge for LSU, and really this is going to give us a good opportunity to see Miles Brennan, the fourth year junior quarterback now, who is expected to get the nod at starter for LSU. We're gonna see him come out. I would imagine that he's going to have time in the pocket, and he's going to be able to build a rhythm, establish a rhythm early. Now, what really remains to be seen is whether or not quarterback Peter Parrish is going to take the field at all. Now, they just announced on, I think, either last week or a couple of days ago that he has been suspended indefinitely for violation of team rules. And that's really all Coach O would talk about. He just said, and this is a quote here, he said, quote, "I don't know when he's going to be back, and that's it," end quote. So, the junior Miles Brennan, who was the backup to Joe Burrow last year, he's going to be the starter. I think that's pretty much expected at this point. And, Brennan had a little bit of playing time last season behind Burrow, especially when they got up on teams later in games. I think he threw for 353 yards with a touchdown and one interception. But we really haven't seen him command the offense. And, at a pre-spring football news conference last week, Ogeron, he praised Brennan, and he talked about some of the strengths that he had seen in practice. But he also kind of opened the door for Parrish and some others. So I mean, he said, and I quote here: "I expect Miles to explode. I expect him to do all the things that he needs to do to be a great quarterback, unless someone beats him out." And that's an end quote. So look, I don't think that he's totally saying that this is up in the air, right? He's not saying this is a coin toss. He's not echoing the sentiment that Dabo Sweeney had when it was Trevor Lawrence and Kelly Bryant. And Dabo was essentially saying, well, it's a week-to-week basis, and we like Kelly, and we think Kelly can start, but you never know, right? You have to be flexible in that kind of situation. And O definitely gave praise to Miles, right? I mean, he's definitely talking him up, but he's also saying at the end, he's like, look, if Parrish does something spectacular, we might have to change our game plan. But now with this new news coming out that Parrish has been suspended indefinitely. I don't know what the violation of the team rules was. I don't think there's been any reporting on that. But that's definitely not a great look for LSU. So they've got, I think, T.J. Finley and Max Johnson back in the wings. Both of those are freshmen, and maybe one of those guys is going to become the second string now. I mean, we just don't really know with this latest development. So that's not great. That's not a great look for LSU. Especially because we're still fairly early into the offseason. I mean, this is only the second week of March. But again, going back to that UT San Antonio game, at this point, one would expect for that to be a tune-up game, and Miles Brennan's going to come out, probably play 2 to 3 quarters, and then whoever is on the second string, maybe even third, later in that game is going to get some playing time. Now, we're going to go to week 2, and we're going to look at the Texas matchup. And this game, this is going to be it's going to be a home game for LSU. So this game's going to be played in Tiger Stadium in Baton Rouge, and that's definitely going to help the Tigers. But it's really I I hesitate to just give the nod to the Longhorns because we saw so much from LSU in those big games last year. But you can't deny the obvious fact that Texas has more pieces returning than LSU. You've got Ellinger there at quarterback, and you have, a lot of the playmakers are coming back. They're really not losing anyone. Now, yes, they were 8-5 last year, right? And that was a disappointing 8-5. In fact, last week on the show, Jason and I talked about what does a program like Texas need to do in order to kind of get back to where they were. Because, remember a couple of years ago, Texas was beating Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, and they kind of had a breakout season, and then they slumped back to 8-5. So, it's gonna be a tricky game because it's at LSU. One would imagine this is going to be a night game and possibly the game of the week, but it's definitely going to be a difficult environment for the Longhorns, and so I think this kind of game is not necessarily decided by which team's the better team. It's going to be decided by who has the momentum late in this game. Because, look, I don't expect Texas to come out and put up a bunch of points. And I don't expect there to be a huge swing one way or the other. I think the pendulum's going to go back and forth, and I think LSU might take the lead early. Texas may kind of get it going into the locker room, and then maybe LSU does some stuff in the third quarter, makes it an interesting game going into the fourth. But I truly think this is the kind of game where if LSU still searching for some answers on offense and maybe even defense, if they can protect Miles Brennan, right, with that O-line, they're going to have to replenish. And Texas isn't able to kind of get their offense going like we've sometimes seen in the past. Ellinger kind of, he throws an interception, has a slump. LSU could squeak out a win here. And that's where things really, really, really get interesting. Because if you look at the rest of LSU's schedule after this week 2 matches. So let's hypothetically say LSU squeaks through Texas, okay? So they're 2-0. They have Rice the next week. Again, that's another non-conference tune-up game. Should take care of business there. So they're 3-0, right? They're 3-0. And when you look at their schedule, they don't play on the road until October 10th. Okay? October 10th is LSU's first road game. They have UT San Antonio, Texas, Rice, Ole Miss, and Nicholas State. Who on that schedule, besides Texas, should give the Tigers a tough game at home? Now, sure, Ole Miss under Lane Kiffin, we don't know yet, all right? So there's a question mark there. But Rice and Nicholas State, I mean, come on. That's LSU's going to win those games. They're going to win them handily, and that's only going to continue to build confidence for Brennan and the rest of the team. And it's going to allow the coordinators to really try out some, different schemes. They're going to tweak some things, and maybe they get past Texas, and then they can spend the next 3 weeks kind of perfecting what they tried against Texas, because that big game, that road game coming up on October 10th at Florida, that's going to be a tough matchup for the Tigers. And, Florida, obviously, last year, I wasn't high on them. They finished 11-2. They were second in the SEC East. But, you look at Florida's schedule, and they're not really playing anyone of significance until they get to LSU. They've got who is this? They've got Eastern Washington, Eastern Washington Eagles. Kentucky at home could be a sleeper game. South Alabama, Tennessee on the road. They host South Carolina. Maybe if South Carolina doesn't have an anemic offense under Will Muschamp, maybe they score some points. But honestly, Florida should not be challenged until LSU comes to town on October 10th. And, look, Florida they're getting back to that point, right? Dan Mullen's been there for a few years. They're reestablishing themselves as a contender in the SEC East. I mean, they were so close this past season to making it to the SEC championship. The fact of the matter is, they're starting to eye that college football playoff. I mean, they're looking at this and they're saying, okay, we were second in the SEC East last season. We've got LSU at home, right? I mean, look, Florida's schedule. Look at this. They have LSU at home, Georgia at home. They have South Carolina at home. Kentucky is at home. The only road games they're playing in the SEC this coming season: Tennessee, Ole Miss, Vanderbilt. Now, Tennessee was 8-5 last year. Ole Miss was 4-8, and Vanderbilt was 3-9. So again, Florida has to be going into this season optimistic, right? They have to be saying, okay, look, if we can get past our home games, if we can take care of business at home, we should be fine on the road, because I just don't see Tennessee. I know they were 8-5 last year, but I'm just not convinced yet on the Volunteers against a team like Florida. Maybe it's a 1 or 2 possession game, but I don't realistically expect the Vols to upset the Gators. So with that being said, when Florida looks at this LSU matchup as their first true test of the season, they have to have the mindset of, guys, if we can get through this game and we can take care of Ole Miss on the road, I mean, you're in the middle of October and you're down the home stretch. You've got Georgia, Vandy on the road, Missouri, New Mexico State, and Florida State. Florida State is in shambles. Mizzou is in shambles. Vanderbilt is just terrible. And New Mexico State, that's a bye week. That's 4 games at the end of the season. That's a bye. Florida has got to be looking at this schedule saying, guys, 10-2 at worst, 11-1, 12-0. And I think it's possible. You look at Florida quarterback Kyle Trask. I mean, they have got lofty expectations. I mean, Florida, I think it's for the first time in a few years, they actually, the expectations have merit, right? In the past, you could argue that they were a little delusional, and I think to a certain extent they were. We're not talking Tennessee level of delusional, but certainly there was, a perception of, well, we're gonna play an SEC championship, and we're gonna, be in the college football playoff discussion, and it's been a process, and they've been getting closer to that goal. And look, credit to Dan Mullen, who I think is a phenomenal coach. I mean, I really like what he did at Mississippi State, and I think he's the right guy for that program. And look, Kyle Trask, he's a redshirt senior, and I really think LSU's only loss, or I'm sorry, Florida's only losses last year were LSU and Georgia. Those games are at home for the Gators. The Gators now, they're returning 6 starters on offense, 5 on defense. You know, and Dan Mullen has already said that it, no starter's job has been decided. But you've got to think that Trask is in a good spot, right, to lead this offense, and he's going to have tight end Kyle Pitts. He's going to have wide receiver Trayvon Grimes. And they got a transfer now from Miami, Lorenzo Lingard, who was a former 5-star at running back. So you look at those pieces, right? You've got a good tight end. The best teams, the teams that have that secret weapon. That's the tight end. That's Kyle Pitts. You got a good wide receiver in Trayvon Grimes, and then you've got when you need to hand the ball off, you've got hopefully Lingard in the backfield who can pick up a chunk of yards for you. So Florida, I think for the first time in several years, actually can go into a season with college football playoff aspirations and not be entirely delusional. I truly feel like they have a legitimate chance here. They really just need to get through LSU and Georgia. So again, we go back to this LSU Georgia game. It's at Georgia. I'm sorry, LSU Florida game, and the fact that it is at Florida. It's the first major test for both of these schools, right? October 10th. We're already halfway through the season. I'm going to have to give the nod to Florida. I am. I'm going to give the nod to Florida because of how, they've it's been a building process for them over the last few seasons. And I think that, they're not losing as many pieces as LSU. Maybe something changes as the season progresses, right? We might get to week 4, week 5. And look, maybe Florida just struggles against Tennessee and South Carolina. It's entirely possible. I mean, the SEC, it's like that sometimes. I mean, you have a team that comes out of nowhere that should not cause, an inferior team that should not cause that much disruption, and they do. And so you just don't know. But as of right now, I think if LSU played Florida, I would have to give the nod to the Gators. So that would give LSU their first loss of the season, right? And at this point, you're thinking, well, that's not the end of the world because they're in the East. Georgia or Florida is in the East. LSU is in the West. I don't know why I keep saying Georgia. It's like I'm high on the Bulldogs with them. But anyway, and then LSU has Arkansas on the road, who didn't even win a conference game last year. I mean, yeah, no, and maybe Arkansas squeaks 1 or 2 out this season, but there's not enough momentum for Arkansas to really make much noise. So LSU's going to get through that, no problem. They got Mississippi State, who was 6-7 last year, at home. I think maybe there's a chance that they overlook this game because guess who's next week? That's right, Alabama in Baton Rouge. So they're circling the Bama game, November 7th. Everyone is circling the Alabama game November 7th. But you have to watch for Mississippi State, a team that, yes, is a perennial, middle of the pack, right? There's nothing about Mississippi State that causes you, that jumps out at you and says, oh my gosh, we really got a plan for this, or we got a scheme for this guy. They're just kind of a plodding along football team, and I think LSU takes care of business there. I'm going to give them the nod, and I'm going to say LSU beats Mississippi State. They go into the Alabama game with that one loss, and here is where things really are going to shape their season, right? This LSU Alabama game in LSU late in the season. There's going to be a lot on the line, and this is a division rival game. Like, this could make or break both of these teams' seasons, and it's going to be um, it's going to be a game where you know it's going to come down to a couple of plays, like we've seen in the past, right? I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if LSU and Alabama keep this tight throughout the entire game. But you gotta think that Alabama is especially hungry after after what happened to them last season. I mean, it's kind of one of those things where they're hungry and look, Bama's not used to this. They're not used to being shut out of the college football playoff and having two regular season losses. I mean that Auburn Alabama game last season just sticks in my mind. What an amazing game that was, the Iron Bowl. But yeah, I mean it's going to be a it's going to be one of the most important seasons of Nick Saban's tenure, and I'll tell you why. Because Alabama has, for so long, been at the top of the food chain, and now all of a sudden, right? They're kind of they're not. I'm not going to say rebuilding because they only lost two games last season, but at the same time, look, they didn't achieve expectations, and whether or not those expectations are realistic, the fact of the matter is, those expectations are there for because of the success that they've had, and it's going to be really interesting to see just from a coaching perspective how Nick Saban approaches this season because this is so different. There's almost like not a there's no blueprint, right? We don't know how does Nick Saban respond when they were largely irrelevant at the end of the season. I mean, after the Iron Bowl, everyone was like, okay, like actually, they're not going to make the playoffs. So like, what do we do now? And it's it's going to be really challenging for them. They have you know they have a lot of pieces coming back, obviously, and they're bringing in a lot of great talent because of their recruiting classes. But two of their first three games, um, you know, are really challenging. I mean, you look at their schedule for this coming season, and they've got USC in, I believe, Dallas to open up the season week one. Always tricky when you're going to a neutral site location. I expect Alabama to win that game. They have more talent. But then you got week three Georgia, and that's a quick turnaround to figure out everything. You got Georgia State in between, so another tune-up game. But that Georgia game you need to circle because look, Kirby Smart is starting to build a powerhouse in Athens, and if Alabama doesn't have their stuff figured out by week three, their season could already be in jeopardy. I mean, if Alabama is 2-1 after week three, there is an opportunity for them to lose focus. There is an opportunity for them to drop a game on the road at Ole Miss. Now, I'm not Arkansas the week after that, but maybe Ole Miss does something that shocks the college football world, or maybe Mississippi State or Tennessee cause a scare. That LSU game is way down at the bottom of the schedule, right? It's November 7th, and you better believe he's got that game circled, and he knows that how important that game is to determining the entire outcome of the season. But if they drop that Georgia game, or if they drop the USC and Georgia game, now that's kind of unthinkable, right? Like 3 or 4 years ago, even last year, you'd been. I mean, that's heresy, right? And there's no way Alabama loses two of their first three. But look, at neutral site games like this, week one, we all know college football is crazy. I mean, there's just games sometimes that are unexplainable, and it could really do a number on Alabama's confidence if they lose one of those, especially in a close fashion, or if a mistake is what loses them the game, right? If throwing an interception or turning the ball over is what loses them a game against USC or Georgia, instead of the other team putting together a game-winning drive and there really being nothing that Alabama could do about it. So, with all that being said, I think at this point Alabama is probably coming out for blood. I think they're pretty peed about going 11-2 last season and missing out on the SEC championship and the college football playoff. So I'm going to give them the nod against LSU. I know I've kind of been talking down on Alabama the last few minutes here, but I really do think that Alabama will get the game. And you also have to really look at like how Alabama has performed against LSU in past years, right? Like if you go and you look at the actual records between these two teams, Alabama just is crushing them in this series. They lead the series 53-26-5, and yes, LSU won this past season, but it's the past few years have been really, really rough. I mean, let's pull up and look at them because from 2012 to 2018, Bama had their number. They won, was that 8 straight games in the series. The last time LSU beat Alabama, besides 2019, was back in 2011 in Tuscaloosa. Number 1 LSU took down number 2 Alabama. Of course, the game of the century, the one we all remember, in my opinion, the best regular season football game ever played. LSU 9, Alabama 6 in overtime. Some would say, immediately that game's terrible, but look, 9-6 in OT, number 1 versus number 2, with number 1 on the road, just. And I know what happened later that season with the rematch in the championship and Alabama beating them, but that is the best regular season football game I have ever seen. And then after that, look, 2012, 2018, Alabama pretty much destroyed them. 21-0 in 2012 for the championship that we just mentioned a few months later. And then in the 2012 season, Bama took down LSU 21-17. Then it was 38-17, 20-13, 30-16, 10-0, 24-10, 29-0. Like there were 3 games in that stretch where Bama just completely shut out LSU. So for a long time, this rivalry kind of felt like the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry, where Ohio State was just they were fielding better teams. They were putting better players, more talented coaches, and they were out coaching, their opponents, and they were winning. And that's why Michigan has dropped so many games to Ohio State in recent years, and it's been so long since the Wolverines have taken down the Buckeyes. But look, LSU got it done this past season, 46-41, an amazing game, also in Tuscaloosa. And I think Alabama was, expecting a hard-fought game, but at the same time, it's just it's going to be a game that they circle, and even if they underperform earlier in the season, they drop a game to Georgia, they're really going to be hungry for that LSU game, and I think they get it done. I think LSU drops their game against Alabama, and so now now you're looking at LSU's schedule. And you're saying, okay, again, this is all hypothetical, but you're saying, all right, you're through, what's this? You're through 9 games, and you're, let's say you're, 8-1. You've beaten. I'm sorry, 7-2 because of the Florida game. I was only looking at Texas. You're 7-2. You've dropped the game on the road at Florida. You've lost to Alabama. You're 7-2. So you're kind of, your college football playoff hopes and your conference championship hopes are getting dashed, and then you go and you play South Carolina at home, Auburn on the road, and then A&M on the road. And they can squeak past South Carolina, I think, and it's really early to be able to say whether or not South Carolina is going to kind of come out of the hole of 4-8 that they were in last year, because look, Muschamp has been there, 4 to 5 years, and he had them at a pretty respectable middle of the pack for a while, but they slipped bad. This past season went 3-5 in the conference, 4-8 overall. So who knows really about South Carolina? A lot of question marks there. I personally think that Muschamp is not being aggressive enough. I've talked to Carolina fans who disagree, and they think he should be more aggressive. But for the sake of this discussion, LSU gets past South Carolina. They move to 8-2. But man, Auburn on the road late in the season, and they're probably going to be dinged up from that Alabama game, maybe even the South Carolina game. It's at Jordan Hare, probably going to be a night game. I would have to give the nod to Auburn, look, you want to talk about a team that feels, I don't want to say feels gypped, but feels like they didn't achieve what they should have last season. You're talking about a 5-3 in the SEC Auburn team, a 9-4 overall, and look, we all know who Auburn beat last season, right? I mean, it goes without saying. I mean, they had so many games where they had the Florida game, right? That was their first loss last season, and it was on the road, and they lost that 23-14. A respectable performance. I mean, yes, I think he should have put up more than 13 points against Florida. And then the 23-20 loss at LSU, who at the time was just rolling. And it was a great game, right? Auburn had a chance. And they lost to Georgia, 21-14. And that's what really did it in for them. Because if they'd have gotten through Georgia and then obviously they beat Alabama, it would have been a much more intriguing SEC championship shakedown. But yeah, Auburn really had a lot of great games. I mean, they performed well against Oregon to start the season in that neutral site location. They won that 27-21. They beat Texas A&M week 4 on the road, 28-20. But yeah, they beat Mississippi State, they beat Arkansas, they beat Ole Miss. But the games they really should have taken care of, the conference games that really mattered, Florida, LSU, Georgia, Alabama, they were 1-3 in those games. 1-3. And people can say, and then you point to the Outback Bowl and the fact that Minnesota trounced them. Well, they didn't trounce them 31-24, but it wasn't as close as the score, looked at the end of the game. You got to think, if you're Auburn, you're kind of disappointed. You're kind of disappointed because you got a huge win against Alabama. But really, the only thing that Alabama win did, the only thing that Iron Bowl win did, was ruin Alabama's chance of getting into the playoff. So you really just played spoiler to your rival instead of boosting your chance of getting an SEC championship berth or a potential playoff, like conversation. So Auburn coming into this season, Gus Malzahn's got to be hungry, and he's got to know, look, we were so close, so many good games last season, so many games we should have won, and they have tough conference games for Auburn this season are at Georgia, October 10th. They have Texas A&M at home the week after, and then LSU and Alabama to close the season. I mean, my goodness. Woo! What a month of November. What a second half of November for the Auburn Tigers. They have Arkansas and UMass before them, so at least they're playing two cupcakes before they get into the slobber knockers, because Auburn can realistically go through their schedule. I mean, Alcorn State, North Carolina, at Ole Miss, Southern Miss, Kentucky. Then you got the Georgia game. They take care of business there on the road in Athens, and they're looking at 6-0 with an A&M, Mississippi State, Arkansas, UMass slate. All of a sudden, the Auburn Tigers are 10-0 going into that LSU game. Now, yes, that's assuming a lot, but here's the point of that discussion. If Auburn gets through that, even 9-1, 9-1 to 10-0, they're going to go into that LSU game, which again is at Jordan Hare. These things matter. People pretend like, oh, it doesn't matter where the game's played. No, it matters where the game is played. It absolutely matters where the game is played. And the fact of the matter is that Auburn, even if they drop that Georgia game, they should be 9-1. They should be 9-1. They should not drop a game to Ole Miss. They shouldn't lose to Kentucky at home. I don't think they should lose to Texas A&M at home. They shouldn't lose to Mississippi State on the road, and they should beat Arkansas and UMass handily. So they're 9-1, maybe 10-0, and they're gonna have so much more to play for than an LSU team that's already lost 2 games. I think Auburn gets that game. I think it, and it took 10 minutes to get there, but you have to look at all the pieces of the puzzle, and you have to look at the fact that LSU is probably going to drop that Florida game, probably going to drop that Alabama game, and I think Auburn takes care of business. I think Auburn takes care of business and they get it done. Now, whether or not Auburn can take down Alabama, that would be. And look, you just kind of have to throw everything out the window when you're talking about these big rivalry games. It's so difficult to predict games like that and to figure out. I mean, you just look at the Duke UNC basketball rivalry and the fact that North Carolina has been abysmal this year, and they still played Duke close. I mean, in their most recent matchup, it's just one of those things where stats, just get thrown out the window, and yeah, I think with the Iron Bowl, it's gonna be a really intriguing matchup. Because of what happened last year and because of what I think will be on the line this coming season, which is what you want, right? That's that the best rivalry games are the rivalry games that mean something to people outside of the rivalry. And I've been preaching this for years, specifically related to Clemson and South Carolina. Clemson fans have this notion of, well, we just want South Carolina to tank and they just be terrible. And I'm like, no, like you want them to be good. And I still think that did more Spurrier did more for Clemson than a lot of Clemson coaches have done because he really motivated the Tigers to get better. Now Muschamp has had a few years in Columbia, but I don't like a 4-8 South Carolina. That does me no good. Like if you're Clemson, you play South Carolina and they're I don't know what would they be? They'd be 4-7. You're like, this doesn't help my strength of schedule. Like I'm trying to play an SEC opponent here. I'd like for them to be at least you know 8, maybe 9 wins, and instead they're 4-7. So anyway, LSU I think will drop that Auburn game, and so that leaves one game, November 28th, and that is at Texas A&M. And here's the fact of the matter: if they're 9-3, they've kind of already lost their playoff and their championship for the SEC hopes. They could overlook this game and kind of give up at the end of the season and go 8-4. But I don't think that's in their DNA. There's very few teams out there that I feel like I can confidently say they will stick it out for a full 60 minutes. And I think anywhere that Ed Ogeron coaches is one of those football teams. And so I think that they're a more talented team than A&M, who has really not. They have underperformed, right? Ever since Jimbo has been there, they haven't done as well as I think a lot of people expected them to do. I mean, they were 8-5 last year, 4-4 in the SEC. A&M was so a middle of the pack team. They were below LSU, Bama, and Auburn in the West standings of the SEC. But I think they get it done. I think LSU will beat A&M on the road, and they'll finish their season 9-3. And while some might say, look, that's a disappointment. I mean, you go 15-0 and then you go 9-3. That's a disappointment. My counter to that is yes, but you can still win 10 games if you win a bowl game. And the fact of the matter is that LSU at 9-3 is probably going to get in a bowl game with a team that is a little bit less talented than they are, right? You always have those 2 or 3 teams that are pretty good, right? But they just lose 1 or 2 games and they get shuffled back in the bowl selection and they end up going to a bowl game that they're just going to whomp the opponent if they show up, right? If they actually go and they show up for the bowl game, they're going to destroy them. And LSU is one of those teams. So LSU, if they get to 10 wins, here's my thing: double-digit wins should always be considered a good season, if not a great season. If you are getting to 10 wins every single year, what are you actually complaining about? I mean, yeah, and look, 100% I get it. People are saying Alabama at 11-2 is a disappointment. I, I understand what you're saying, but I still feel like LSU they won the title last year, and I think they have a title in 2007 and 2004, I believe. But the fact of the matter is that you have to have consistent. Okay, look at a program like Clemson or even Ohio State. Um, those schools started out. Yeah, they had a breakout season or so, but they've been consistently winning 10, 11, now 12 or 13 games. Like, I mean, for a while, Clemson's standard was like 8 or 9. It was like you get 8 or 9 wins, like 8 wins in the regular season, you get the ninth in the bowl game. It's like, wow, that's a pretty, that's good, solid. And then it became 10, and it was like, all right, we get to 10 wins, like that's a marker of success for this year. And that has continued to go up, right? The number's ticking up, and it's probably around the 13 to 14 number now. But the fact of the matter is, you got to start somewhere. And you look at this 15-0 season for the LSU Tigers last year, and you can definitely say this is an anomaly, and they're going to go back to being 8-4 or 9-4 because they don't have a quarterback. And as of right now, they don't have a proven quarterback. But there is a pathway for LSU to rebuild and become a consistent 9, 10, 11 win team. And I'm just telling you, when you're a 9, 10, 11 win team, year in and year out, you're a top 15 program. You're a top 15 program. You're probably going to be playing in your conference championship maybe every other year, and your recruiting classes are going to get better and better and better. They're going to get better and better and better. And I don't think the sentiment from the fans around the program is going to decrease at all. I think fans are going to become content. I mean, if you consistently deliver 10 or 11 wins every season, that's the marker of consistency, and that what you're doing is working, and that you're building a program, and eventually you're going to have that breakout season where you do something like 13, 14, maybe even a 15-0 season again. I mean, we just don't know. We obviously 15-0 is pretty much, I mean, it is the marker of perfection, and a lot of people said when the playoff came out, it's like, oh, there's just no way that two teams are going to face off against each other and be 14-0 in the championship. It's just too difficult, and we saw it, right? We've seen this. So I mean, Clemson and Alabama have done it. Now Clemson and LSU have done it, and to have two 15-0 champions in the last 2 years really showcases that it is possible, it is doable, no matter what conference you're in, and we will likely see another 15-0 champion. I don't think it's going to happen next year. I mean, just again, statistically, it would be really, really, really difficult to do. But hey, you just never know. College football is a fickle thing, and I think going back to LSU though, to kind of wrap up this whole discussion, I really feel strongly that LSU, while they've lost a lot and they have a lot of pieces to replace, there is a pathway to building a consistent program and not being one of those schools that wins a national championship and then just kind of slips back into the sea of mediocrity. I mean, that's really it's possible. It certainly is possible. I'm not saying that it's impossible. It's just that I think LSU has a better path forward, and Coach O, I think, he is really establishing roots there in Baton Rouge. I think the administration likes him. I think the fans love him, and as long as there's not any major violations or issues, he should be there for a long, long time. Now, we'll have to see what comes out about the suspension surrounding Peter Parrish, because being suspended indefinitely from the team is definitely not a great look. So once we have more information on that, then maybe that'll kind of clear up some of the clouds surrounding the program. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I think this is totally doable for the LSU Tigers, and I think that there is a path forward for them. And it's just it's going to be a really interesting season for them. I think it can go either way, right? They can lose to Texas, lose to Florida, lose to Alabama, and lose to Auburn, and maybe A&M, and have 4 to 5 losses, or they can take care of Texas. Maybe they beat Florida, and maybe they only lose to Alabama and Auburn, or maybe they beat Auburn. Like there's so many possibilities, and that's what makes it so exciting to watch in the fall. Is because it's really it's all up in the air, and it's and I personally think Coach O is one of the best ambassadors for the sport right now, up there with the likes of Dabo Sweeney and somebody like even Dino Babers, and it just passionate, enthusiastic, and just seems to be a really, really good guy who cares about the players that are in his program. So yeah, we'll see what happens for the LSU Tigers this coming season. But we're out of time here, and I always enjoy bringing you another edition of After Further Review. Thanks so much for tuning in. Don't forget, if you want to connect to us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, we are out there. You can reach us at After Review Show. And if you want to listen to us on iTunes, we got a podcast up. Just search After Further Review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast, and you can download the most recent edition of AFR to your phone. Listen to us on the go. But anyway, that's been it for this edition of AFR. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Thanks for listening, everyone.